If you're a marketer or business owner, you already know TV advertising is a powerful channel for business growth. It's also a solution for businesses frustrated by digital marketing's rising cost. But the traditional process for launching TV campaigns is expensive, time-consuming, and complex. Marketing Architects believes brands deserve access to quality TV campaigns. That's why they flipped the traditional TV agency model on its head to create all-inclusive TV. With all-inclusive TV advertising, Marketing Architects invest their own money to produce, analyze, and optimize your TV campaign. All you pay for is media. This means you get top-tier solutions for every piece of your campaign, but without the dramatic price tag, setting you up for rapid growth at an extreme cost advantage. In fact, all-inclusive TV is so revolutionary, they wrote a book about it. If you're a marketer, business leader, or interested in the TV advertising industry, you'll want to grab a copy of All-Inclusive TV, How Booming Brands Are Reimagining TV Advertising. Read how other brands use TV to transform their businesses and how you can do the same. Go to marketingarchitects.com/book to get your free copy today. Again, that's marketingarchitects.com/book. You know, I've been talking about earned media value for quite some time on this podcast. My friends at Eisenberg have just raised the bar on earned media benchmarks with their Social Index. Social Index now gives you globally earned media values across a growing list of 6 geographies for all your KPIs across the top 7 social platforms: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Snapchat, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. You can now visualize these values for deeper analysis, and they have a look-back window over 2 years of historical comparisons. Social Index is updated daily. Don't get stuck with old data. Over 1,000 companies have used the Social Index to understand the ROI of their social campaigns. And if you work with a social agency, you should demand they incorporate earned media values into your reports. Get your earned media value for social content. Visit earnedmediavalues.com/Alan. Again, that's earnedmediavalues.com/ALAN.
For all of us, it's about predicting where the consumer is going and getting half of it right.
One of the things we want to do is create ads that don't suck.
Embracing change creates great possibility.
I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today. Today on the show, I've got Ian Colley. He's the Executive Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at The Trade Desk. Prior to his current role, Ian spent 20 years at IBM leading communications for a range of divisions, including IBM Cloud, IBM Finance, Global Services, and IBM Europe. He began his career in New York City in communications agencies like Edward Novanti and Associates, among others, and where he worked with clients such as Goldman Sachs, Barclays Bank, Club Med, and Comex. On the show today, we talk about The Trade Desk and his early start there, his switch from communications to the marketing function as the CMO at The Trade Desk. And we talk about the open internet, why that's important, why The Trade Desk is focused on the open internet, and their recent brand campaigns, What Matters, and much more. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Ian Colley. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for inviting me to be on with you this morning.
Yeah, it should be a good conversation. We're going to talk about a subject I've never talked about before. I hear you know a thing or two about chicken processing.
Well, yes, I've listened to some of your podcasts and some of your guests talk about early jobs in their careers. And so one of the odd jobs I had very early on, while I was still in college, actually, was spending one summer working in a chicken processing plant. And my job was to kind of sort out the raw chickens into sizes. And what I didn't realize when I started was that, for me anyway, standing in front of a conveyor belt all day long for 8 hours a day would give me motion sickness. But in addition to that, when you're dealing with raw chickens, apparently I was told that if one person on the conveyor belt gets sick, everybody gets sick because raw chickens will carry those germs down the line. So I think I lasted about 2 weeks before I got as sick as I have ever been. And I was laid up all weekend, so sick. And that was as long as I lasted in the chicken processing career.
Well, I'm glad you made it out. And I'm really thankful that I've never had to do that because I don't want to be sick from chicken or people on the line, so to speak. But I do hear, and I'm sure listeners will hear a somewhat faint accent right now. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in the UK. So I grew up in the UK and went to college in the UK and came to New York right after college.
Nice. Well, how did you get from chicken processing to becoming this chief marketing officer at the trade desk? Tell me a little bit about that journey.
I've been here about 3 years. And prior to that, I was at IBM for more than 2 decades. But I started my career in public relations, doing PR mostly for financial services companies in New York City before I joined IBM and worked in a wide number of different roles at IBM before I joined the trade desk to lead their communications team. And from there, kind of worked on more marketing projects as well to where we are today.
Well, and spending I think I counted it this morning on your LinkedIn profile, 23 years at IBM, and now going to the trade desk, very different. I mean, large global behemoth to fast growth startup, and not a startup anymore, but a fast growth company. Tell me about that transition. What was that like?
It's been a fascinating transition. I think whenever you work in communications or marketing, you're really looking for what is the compelling story that you have to tell. And certainly at IBM, there were many great stories to tell. A lot of it about how a company is constantly transitioning itself to stay at the forefront of an industry. At a company like the Trade Desk, it's a different environment. It's a much younger company. It's a fast growing company. And that's a different story in and of itself, but a very compelling one. And when I first joined the Trade Desk, I felt that this was a company that was growing spectacularly, was helping redefine an industry. And in there was a fascinating story. And I felt that it was a place where you could do fascinating communications and marketing work. So regardless of size, I think if you're in this business, that's a key part, I think, of what can be very motivating is what is the compelling story that we have to tell.
I like that. And like you mentioned a minute ago, primarily communications roles until this CMO role. Is that true? Is that correct?
Yes, but I think there's always some crossover. And I think it's not unusual these days for communications leaders to step into marketing roles and vice versa. I think there's so much crossover between the two. And I think in both cases, at their very best, they're all about the art of persuasion. How do you get someone to believe in your story or buy your product? And that always comes down to compelling storytelling. It may take different forms, right? In communications, you might be thinking about writing a speech or talking with a reporter about your company. In marketing, there are so many other ways that you're telling that story, and they come in different formats and different timeframes, and it forces you to think about it in different ways. But ultimately, you're still thinking about that same thing. How do I convince someone about this product or this service or this company in a way that's really compelling? So I think there is a lot of territory where these two roles do overlap.
No, I mean, I definitely agree. And Ian, I really like talking to folks that came out of the communications or even public relations, media relations background, because you talk about storytelling, there's an edge and a sharper point, if you will, to the stories that I hear from those folks. And I don't know if it's because of the fact that you've been trying to influence media and journalists, and it's really about the facts and tell me why I should care about this. But I enjoy that aspect. I don't know if you agree with that perspective that folks coming from your background have that superpower, so to speak.
I think you're hitting on something there. I think if you do work in a communications field like PR that you talked about, the audience that you're dealing with is very real. It's very visceral, right? You might be talking to an analyst or a reporter or an audience that you're giving a speech to. So you have to think about the message in a very, very clean and direct way because you have a very direct audience that you're trying to communicate with and to persuade. In a broad marketing level, the audience is a bit more abstract, right? I'm trying to I'm trying to convince the broad market. Well, who is that market? And you can get closer to it by thinking about personas and different audiences that you're trying to influence, but it's not right in front of you, right? It's out there. So I think having that very direct, visceral audience that you're trying to communicate with does make it very immediate and forces you to be very, very focused on that immediate story that you're telling and the immediate message that you're trying to deliver, which I think is a very useful muscle to build.
Well, let's talk about the trade desk. The trade desk currently is positioning itself around the open internet versus, say, walled gardens like a Google, as an example. What does that mean to the industry and to the trade desk to be for the open internet?
Sure. I think one way of thinking about it is from a marketer's perspective. If you want to advertise on social, you might go to Facebook. And if you want to advertise via search, you might go to Google. But if you want to reach the rest of the internet, which, by the way, is where the majority of consumers spend most of their time, you're going to go on the open internet, and you're likely to use a platform like the Trade Desk. And what's compelling about the open internet for a lot of our clients is you do get to understand exactly where your marketing dollars are going to show up against what kind of content, and you can make sure that it's consistent with your brand. You do get to measure the impact of your campaigns in a much more immediate and real-time way so that you can optimize those campaigns on the fly and iterate them. And lastly, I think one emerging benefit is this whole world of connected television, which is just exploding and which exists on the open internet. And for most marketers, television, I think, remains the largest part of their campaign spend. As more consumers shift to streaming platforms and as more broadcasters shift content to streaming platforms, the opportunity to apply data to those TV campaigns for the first time is tremendously compelling, and again speaks to the power, we believe, of the open internet.
Yeah. Well, and I hadn't thought about CTV or streaming TV as an element of the open internet, but you're right. Tell me a little bit more about how you guys are getting engaged in that environment, if you will.
Well, I think advertisers are increasingly looking at the value of connected television, as I said, because consumers have shifted over to connected to streaming platforms, and it allows advertisers to, in the TV environment, to be much more precise about their campaign spend. So in a linear kind of TV environment, advertisers don't know exactly who's consuming their content. But in a streaming world, it's much more data driven. So there's much more precision and a much better understanding of consumer interaction with the ads. So they can apply data to TV for the first time. They can start to optimize then across channels and do things like manage frequency in a much more educated way, because they can understand, exactly which consumers have consumed their content across a wide range of channels and manage that process in an omni-channel way.
Yeah, I was talking to another streaming provider recently, Roku, and they were describing this. And as I hear you talk about it, it makes perfect sense, which is there's an appeal to connected TV or streaming to both a traditional TV big brand marketer, because now I can be more precise, as well as the performance marketer, because it's at the end of the day, it's about delivering the right message to the right person at the right time. And so there's a little bit of both, almost maybe a magic media element there in connected TV.
Yes, and I think if you want to reach kind of the entire market that you're trying to influence, you have to look at connected television, because a lot of your audience is no longer on linear. The rate of cord cutting has only accelerated through the pandemic. And as I said, a lot of those eyeballs have shifted to CTV. And what we see with a lot of our clients is that they're getting significant incremental reach. So in addition to their linear spend, adding that CTV component allows them to reach those audiences that now are primarily focused on streaming platforms. And that's only going to grow as more streaming platforms offer ad-supported options, as we've seen from several content providers in recent weeks and months.
Well, the Trade Desk is a huge tool in the arsenal for marketers. Let's talk about marketing the Trade Desk. You've created a new brand platform for yourself. Tell me a little bit more about that.
What we wanted to do was help people understand what it is that the trade desk does and the value that we're delivering to our clients and to the market. And it's a lot of it's about what we've been talking about. It's about the power and value of the open internet, and what can you do there that you can't do in say a walled garden environment. So it's about, why do things like reach matter? Why do things like objectivity matter? Why do things like performance and measurement matter to today's modern marketer? And trying to, these are not necessarily always the easiest concepts to understand. We understand that the world of data-driven advertising can be a little opaque to many people. So we're trying to explain the why these things are important, why they matter, why they're valuable to a marketer in ways that are fairly easy to digest. So that's really kind of the essence of it. Why should the open internet matter to a marketer? And the various dimensions that we can bring that story to life.
One of the, I guess, brand elements that caught my attention was a video that was around because journalism matters, and kind of struck a chord with me. I'm a closet journalist with the podcast, but also, in college worked for the student newspaper, and many of my colleagues went on into the newspaper industry, which you probably know is kind of a dying industry, so to speak. And so I don't know, that one really caught my attention because it just feels like the open internet was about information and being able to provide information that people wanted to consume. And folks like the Trade Desk, it seems to be that you're positioned well to help keep that dream alive, so to speak.
You're absolutely right. We believe that journalism is incredibly important to society in terms of that free flow of information. And when you think about how the internet works, right? It's a value exchange. You get free content in return for relevant advertising. And the more relevant the advertising, delivered in obviously a privacy safe way, the more valuable the ad impressions become, the more revenue that the content provider gets, and the more content that they can produce. And I don't think there's any industry that understands that value exchange more clearly than journalism, which, as you say, has been transformed over the last couple of decades by digitization. So it's an area that we focus on a lot. And even with the launch of a recent product, OpenPath, which is a direct kind of pipe for our advertisers to premium publisher inventory. And we started that project with journalistic outlets because they do understand this value exchange, and they understand that they want as transparent and competitive a marketplace for their ad impressions as possible so that they can be as competitive as possible. So when we launch things like OpenPath, we do think about journalism, in this case, first as we build those products.
I mean, I think that's really important. And I love that notion of what you've built with OpenPath, because I think there was a story, I don't know, it seems like years ago at this point, The Guardian, I believe, bought their own ads just to see how much they would get out of the value chain, if you will. And there were so many slices of that I can't remember the end result, but it was, pennies on the dollar that they were getting, or pennies on the pound, or pence on the pound, I should say, since it's The Guardian. So it's nice that you guys have a direct pathway for marketers to actually buy that inventory, that what the inventory is from a marketer standpoint. That's really important, with some messier ecosystems out there than the Trade Desk has. And it seems like a win-win-win for everyone in that case.
We hope so. We're certainly very focused as a company on ensuring a competitive and transparent digital advertising ecosystem. And we've done a lot of things over the years to make that possible. And OpenPath just being the latest thing. But we're highly focused on making sure that we deliver more value to our clients than we extract. And we hope that everybody in the ad ecosystem is focused on the same thing. And things like OpenPath, I believe, help us get there.
Well, I've enjoyed talking about the Trade Desk and learning a little bit more about you. Let's go a little deeper. One of the things I like to do is ask a series of questions to all the guests that come on. And my favorite question to ask everyone is, has there been an experience of your past that defines or makes up who you are today?
I think very, very early in my career, I was working for a fellow called Ed Novotny, who was the lead PR guy for Goldman Sachs for many, many years. And he was always very, very focused on kind of the why of what you're doing. You don't do things just because everybody else is doing them. or because that's the way things have always been done. You always think about what is the objective you're trying to achieve for your client? How are you going to think about getting there, and what's the journey to the payoff? So always a very strategic approach to the work, and highly focused on that. And that's, I think, something I've taken with me ever since those very early days in my career.
Yeah, no, that's really wise advice. Well, if you were starting this journey all over again, besides not working at that chicken processing plant, what advice would you give your younger self?
Oh, great question. I think I would advise myself not to worry so much. I think when you look back on a career and think about the things you worried about at various points, and then years later you realize those things didn't really matter. They weren't that important. And so I think always be looking forward and not worry as much.
Well, is there a topic that you think other marketers should be learning more about, or you're trying to learn more about yourself?
I think just as an industry, we're heading toward $1 trillion total addressable market for advertising. One of the few industries that's at $1 trillion level. But as we race toward that $1 trillion mark, more and more of that market will be digital. All of it will be digital over time. More of it will be traded programmatically. So I think it's more and more, even brand marketers today are understanding programmatic and the value of data-driven advertising. But I think that's where the industry is headed. So I think and I'm doing the same thing myself, right? Learning the ins and outs of how all this works. And the more you get into it, the more fascinating it becomes. And you realize the power and value of really working with data to optimize your campaign. So I think that's something that more marketers are going to be focused on in the years ahead.
A lot of people, the old school marketers, if you will, they're kind of scared by it. But I think scared because they think that the creativity is going to go away. But I think that's completely false, because just the levers that we've talked about that you have now available to you create endless amounts of creativity.
I think you're absolutely right. I think even in our own campaigns, the optionality you get in data-driven advertising means you have so much more flexibility to create different kinds of creative approaches, and to iterate on them much more quickly than in traditional formats. And I think that can be really exciting to the creative side of marketing.
Well, we've got two more questions for you. On a personal note, or things that you notice in the world, are there brands or companies or causes that you follow or you think other people should be taking notice of?
I've become really fascinated lately by in this kind of generation of very successful founder-led companies. Trade Desk being one, by the way. But I just finished watching We Crashed about WeWork, which is a fascinating story. But you also look at Amazon, Tesla, and Facebook, and other companies where you have these incredibly visionary founders that have created value out of nothing. Just understanding how they did that, their approach to that, and kind of what makes someone able to do that. What is it that they're bringing to the table that creates that value? I think it's just fascinating to try to understand.
I'm still working my way through We Crash, so don't give me any spoilers.
Well, it's a public. I guess it's based
a public story.
It's a public story. Yeah.
But it is fascinating. It is very, very fascinating. The first episode in particular, I was like, "What? This is who this guy was?" Because you never know. You always see them once they're already achieved success, right? You don't see them necessarily as people before that happens. So anyway, I found it fascinating so far. What's the largest opportunity or threat to marketers today in your mind?
I think the biggest opportunity is perhaps something we've already talked about, which is the shift to connected television. Given that is for many marketers, television in general, video, the largest part of their campaign spend, the shift to CTV is a massive opportunity to rethink how we think about video and TV advertising around the world. In terms of threats, I think it's hard to ignore the changing identity landscape. Not that that's a threat. I think that's also potentially an opportunity too, because I think what will happen is there will be a shift from opt-out internet to an opt-in internet, where we will create much more privacy-safe identity solutions that allow advertisers to do their work of delivering relevant advertising, that allow publishers to maximize revenue on their end and provide consumers with more control over privacy. So it's work, and there's so much going on in the industry to solve for that. But I think that's also an opportunity.
Yeah. Well, and it's a huge marketing opportunity from a fact of like, how do you get people to opt in? What value are you creating for them that allows them to say, yes, I will allow? So yeah, it's a fascinating landscape. It's an interesting time. It seems like it's always an interesting time in marketing. I just want to say thank you for coming on the show, sharing your wisdom.
Thank you, Alan, for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hi, it's Alan again. Marketing Today was created and produced by me with support from my team and podcast editors, sound engineers, and writers at Share Your Genius. Find them at shareyourgenius.com. If you're new to Marketing Today, please feel free to write us a review on iTunes or your favorite listening platform. Don't forget to subscribe on marketingtodaypodcast.com and tell your friends and colleagues about the show. I love to hear from listeners. You can contact me on marketingtodaypodcast.com. There you will also find complete show notes, links to what was discussed in the episode today, and you can search our archives. I'm Alan Hart, and this is Marketing Today.